Great. Thanks so much, Jess. Appreciate the introduction. And nice to see. I'm just grinning from ear to ear, watching a lot of old friends and people I know logging in to watch this, and some people I don't know. So that's really exciting to see people come out on a Friday afternoon. Perhaps there's a benefit in having everybody forced to stay at home and be locked in their basements. They have nothing better to do than come and watch my presentation. So that's great. I also want to say before I start that I noticed my mom is watching. So I want to send a big, huge thanks to her for watching. Obviously, none of this is possible without her and everything she taught me and her joy of reading and joy of learning and thinking and all that good stuff. So before I get into any discussion, I want to recognize her and everything she's done for me and certainly my family. So thanks for that. And yeah, so I want to talk a little bit today about some research we're doing, trying to move away a little bit from what is often referred to as highly invasive or even highly invasive research, which often involves catching animals. A lot of my career has been really focused on catching animals with a net gun fired from a helicopter and collaring, trapping animals on the ground, these sorts of things. And so that has been successful and that works, but it also means that it can have some real impacts on animals. And indeed, a lot of concerns from communities we hear over and over, very justifiable and indeed appropriate concerns about, what kinds of impacts does this invasive research have? And so that's really pushed us to think hard about ways we could do it better. So I'm going to just jump in and start talking about some of the work we've been doing along the Hudson Bay coast. Assuming I can get my slides to transition that in. Oh, there we go. So we're going to go up to along the coast of Hudson Bay, the western coast, and this red area is Woodland National Park, established in 1996. And I went up there.
I'm staying at home for a few weeks and blogging to my
Someone's talking. If you just mute your microphone there, please.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Bonnie, I can hear you talking in the background there. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, so where we're going to talk about today, or this gray area, the largest wetland in North America, one of the largest in the world, is called the Hudson Bay Lowlands, this gray shaded area. It's basically one massive wetland, and in it is Wapass National Park in red and the Churchill Wildlife Management Area in blue. These are the area where I've spent a good portion of my life, probably on the order of 400 plus days in the field so far, tromping around this area studying wildlife and habitat. And then to zoom in a little bit more and look at the park, one of the things that it is a wildlife park, really only accessible by helicopter in the summer, and then of course by lots and lots of hiking around between sites. And because this is polar bear country and there's lots of bears in the land, we have to stay at designated camps. And a big focus of our work has actually been in Nestor 1 camp in the north part. That's as we'll see, that's where the Caribou crabbing grounds are, and that summer range essentially is in that area between those three camps. And so it's been really, really exciting to get that opportunity to go up there every summer and in the winter to some degree as well, and be able to study wildlife and live on the land and learn so much from the people up there. I want to say first and foremost that while this is research, and we're talking about research results a bit today, I really want to emphasize the training portion of this, and that really my philosophy is that while research is useful and important and we want to put out good results, we also, at least in my position as a professor, is that my job is also about training. And so a big focus you'll see through my presentation is students, and this is probably the favorite part of my job, is watching students do hands-on real research, not made up written assignments, not make work exercises, but contributing to real on-the-ground research. And so this has been a component of my life for virtually my entire career. And these students are all part of my field course that come up to Churchill every summer, and we fly by helicopter to this tiny little remote camp. And the person on the right is Murray Gillespie, who built that camp and really has been a tremendous mentor for me in learning and pulling all this off in terms of science and all of the logistics of when I said to a bunch of people that I was going to take this field course out to this little camp, the first 15 people I asked all said, no, it's not possible. And Murray was one of the very, very few, if probably not the only person, who said, yeah, let's give it a try. And indeed, we've been doing it since 2005. And then also, really want to emphasize this relationship with, these are university undergraduates mostly, but graduate student Derek Leask on the right. This is at the very northern tip of Wapusk. And what's really cool about this is a 34K full day hike that we do. It's one of the highlights of my year, and we collect data along the way and photos, and we learn and talk and just have this amazing full day that goes pretty much dawn to dusk. And so Derek has been working on Caribou with me for 3 years now. And then there's Matt Allen on the left. He looks very refreshed because we had to actually carry him the whole way, and so he looks nice and relaxed, but the rest of us are pretty exhausted. This is the halfway point. Now we're going to turn around and walk all the way back. And so I've been working with the park since it was established in 2006, and so, or 1996, pardon me. And so they've been a great collaboration, providing logistics support and staff, and everything I've ever asked for, I think they've come through over these now 20 plus years. So that's pretty amazing. And the other group that I work with is called Isomer. And this is a group of high school students from around North America that we bring up to Churchill every year. And again, the focus here, they're rolling up their sleeves and they're physically touching the permafrost. And so we don't talk about permafrost, we don't show diagrams of it. We actually get them to physically touch and probe it with metal probes and collect data. And so we've been collecting data like this for well over 15 years now. And getting good data, but also obviously engaging lots and lots of people, hundreds and hundreds of people so far, on the order of 400, with one of my major life goals of getting 1,000 students out to Wapusk to do science. Notion of invasiveness. I also wanted to just touch a bit on working with communities, because that's a cornerstone of what we do, and mention this idea that while we want to be minimally invasive when we work with animals, we also spend a lot of time thinking and talking about how to be minimally invasive with the communities that we work in. And one of those ways is buying locally, and there's what would that be, about 11-foot long receipt for groceries that we bought to take out to our field camp with us. And so trying to spend money locally. So we've spent several tens of thousands of dollars every summer in the community, and we try and really work with them in positive ways that work for us and also benefit the community, and try and minimize the footprint that we have as well. And so I think when we talk about minimally invasive, I think of that very broadly and not just on the how you capture an animal portion. We also try and do a lot of service, and so here's us donating previous 2019 summer to the food bank, and trying to contribute as much as we can. And so to start this story, my story along the Hudson Bay coast started 9,714 days ago, and I had this crazy notion that as an early undergrad that I wanted to get away from the farm for one summer and try something different. And here's me on the tundra for the first time, quite young and enthusiastic, and it really was that's when it started in 1994. So I was actually going into what is Wapusk National Park before the park was actually established. So that if you want to feel old, there's a good way to feel old. But that really was where it all started, and I sort of went off as a one-off just to maybe get off the baler for a few weeks and do something exciting with my life. And guess what? I got completely hooked, and I've been going back almost every year since. I missed 1 year during my sabbatical, and then last year because of COVID. But other than that, I've been up pretty much every year collecting data and working with a lot of great people. There's Derek on the left. There's Jade Ryan, who's been involved in our course. There's Dene Elder Jeff Bussador as well, who came out on the land with us in 2019, and really finding that the benefits to being on the land and really moving away from this early notion of scientists going out and collecting data and then flying south and interpreting that, which is what I thought science was when I first started. And we've completely drifted away from that, and not trying to lose the science, but recognize that we have to do this with communities, and we want to do this, and there's benefits to the communities, and there's huge benefits to the research. And I remember when I first started working up there for my master's in the 1990s, one of the conditions of my research permit was that I had to do a presentation to the community. So this is how old I am. I had my slide tray with my actual 35 mil slides all set up, and to do my presentation one evening in the town of Churchill. And exactly 2 people showed up in this huge theater, and they were tourists. And halfway through my presentation, they got up and left. And I realized that I was doing engagement all wrong. And that was the beginning of a long learning, which is still going on, trying to figure out how to do research in a way that is collaborative with communities and minimally invasive to the animals we work with. And of course, those very much go hand in glove, because communities don't tolerate, and justifiably don't tolerate, overly invasive research. And they want to see research done in respectful ways that respect communities as well as the animals and the environment. So that's really a cornerstone philosophy. And of course, we've got to have lots of fun along the way. That's been an absolute cornerstone for us as well, is that science isn't supposed to be long and boring and dry. We do have a lot of fun along the way, and whether that means playing hooky for a half day and go kayaking with beluga whales, or just having good laughs all along, I think that has really helped our research, I think, succeed as it has, is that I think everybody finishes knowing they had a really good time along the way. So in terms of non-invasive research, of course, one of the things that has been an early and immediate focus for us is thinking about how to use local and traditional knowledge. And because I'm a mapping guy, and I think with geographic information systems, and even, again, being old enough that I remember making these Mylar overlays and stacking them up and creating maps through that. But sitting down with local people and saying, where do you hunt caribou? Where do you see caribou? Where are the calving grounds? Where are the wintering areas? These sorts of things. And we've been able to collect a lot of information from communities. And this is these are 2 people that lived in Churchill for a long time, Greg and Maria, that were quite involved in our course for many, many years before they moved down to Winnipeg. And here we are students collecting some information from people in the town of Churchill, and the map on the left shows and what's really remarkable, actually, and remember this, that pink area in the outline is what was identified by a number of interviews with people in and around this area where the calving ground was. And think about where that pink area is. When we show you what we got from some of the other types of data collection, and they match up absolutely remarkably well, which is one of the more interesting findings we've had so far. And so finding ways to work with communities and pay them for their time, respect their time and knowledge, but also find ways. And one of the core things that we think a lot about in my research group is this crazy idea of how do you use local and traditional knowledge with more conventional science methods and sort of integrate across methods. And, working with Parks Canada has been great, especially in the last few years. They've really in the last 2 years, there's been a big focus of caribou. And so I was invited last February. It was actually the last time I was on a commercial plane was February of last year. Almost a year now already that I've traveled, but I was invited up to Churchill to be part of this community workshop that was just amazing. And on the wall, you can see some of the resources that we developed years ago. And this was part of my postdoc work, these posters of caribou anatomy. And so we've developed, working with communities and going on hunting trips on the land, we've developed these posters over the years and purposefully leave a lot of white space around them, because one of the things we started doing was having communities label them, but every single community has slightly different dialects and different words for different parts of the caribou. And of course, in some groups, for example, the Inuit on Baffin Island have many, many different names for each part of the antler of the caribou. And so we would have these, and then we'd show them somewhere else, and someone would say, well, no, that's not right. That's not what you call that part of the caribou. It's this. Who wrote that? And of course, in fact, there are lots of different variations, as we would expect across Canada. And so what we do now is say, okay, absolutely, here's a set of blank posters with different layers showing, the bones all the way up to the outer skin, and you label it however you want. You keep those in your community and use those. And so we've printed off, gosh, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of copies of those posters, and they've been a real hit and a real opportunity for discussion around caribou. When we're in Churchill and in the community, we also try and work a lot with people in the community. And here we are working with a trapper in Churchill. He came out to the Churchill Northern Study Center with this university class in 2019 and taught us all about trapping and furs and animals. And so this engagement with the community and going out with Métis dog sledders and Dene elders and this sort of thing has been absolutely fundamental to the training. And again, spending that time which traditionally I think a lot of us, and certainly how I was trained, was that, time is money. Get out to the field, get your data, and get the heck out of there and start analyzing. As I say, we've completely abandoned that notion and really tried to invest, and it is very much an investment of time and energy to get out there. So to jump into actually some of the more field-based projects, I want to first jump into this really cool project we've been working on for a few years now, looking at shed antlers from female caribou. And so the biology is really interesting. At the male caribou with the big racks, they lose their antlers after the rut in the late fall, early winter. Females that don't have young will lose their antlers fairly early as well. But pregnant females will keep those antlers on until parturition. And when that calf is born, very quickly after, those antlers fall off. They don't need them anymore. They had those antlers to protect their feeding sites and get that nutrition they needed. And now when the calf is born, then they're off and the antlers fall off. And so actually through working with students and, a lot of the really good ideas, of course, if you hang around with students long enough from high school to university, master's, PhD, postdocs, we've had that whole range out in the field up at Nestor One and spent many, many hours out on the land, and students come up with all these ideas. And so through discussion, we came up with this idea, and this is Cassidy. For her undergrad thesis project, she went around and a number of us helped, and we hiked around all along the habitats around. This is the tundra habitat around Cape Churchill in northern part of Wapusk, and GPSed every time you find a shed female antler, GPS it. And you'd be able to map those out. And if you GPS enough of them, the idea was that could you actually identify the habitats and the distribution of the caribou calving grounds using just those data alone. And so luckily we also had, provincial government has collected quite a lot of GPS collar data and hadn't really used it a whole lot. And so working with them, we've been able to use those data to compare and evaluate and look at, what is really working, with these. Do these data do as good a job or not so much in terms of comparison with collars? And so working with Derek Leask and Cassidy, we spent a lot of time collecting the data. And on the left is where Derek has done some really neat work. If you look at the GPS collar data and the movement rates, movement changes from day to day, of course, but during that exact date when that calf is born, it drops really sharply, very close to zero, right at zero. That female stops, she steps away from the herd, steps off the beach ridge typically, and has a calf on her own for a very short period and then rejoins the herd. So that movement in those collar data, you can actually identify exactly where and exactly when those calves are born. And so that's the left-hand graph showing all of these dots where calves were born from these collared female caribou and the red line is there. You can still see the outline of Wapusk. And so Wapusk does a very good job of capturing, of protecting the large majority of that calving area. You see a few outside in the WMA, the Wildlife Management Area, but the majority of calving sites are within the park, which is a great thing. And then from the field work we did, walking around and GPSing antlers, you can see all of those red dots. They're not as widespread. Because this is mostly, well, this is all of us just walking essentially and GPSing as we go. And in fact, we have more to add to this as well from walking to Cape Churchill. But these points then say, okay, well, there's some known locations which we assume are close to, are good approximates of where calves are born as well. And then Derek took all the collar data and looked at that in the post-calving. So in that period right after those calves are born, look at these are individual collar points collected over several weeks post-calving. And so we have three different data sets here that we can compare and look at and say, how good of a job do these three do in terms of defining the calving range of this particular herd? And what's remarkable and quite striking is, and I didn't overlay it on this map, but if you recall from the traditional knowledge interviews, this area of red, which is the highest quality migratory caribou calving habitat in Wapusk, most of these caribou are migratory, although surprising to me as much as anybody is these there are some non-migratory animals in the south part of the study area as well. But most of them migratory, and remarkably, the traditional knowledge got it right and told us, yeah, this is where we see the calving caribou. And the post-calving data from the collar data, the shed data, and the calving one, when we make these what are called a resource selection function model, which predict the occurrence of parturient caribou or post-parturient caribou, they all look pretty darn similar, and remarkably so, how well they predict the same. And so you could spend $450,000 on collecting GPS collar data, and there's lots of reasons why collar data can be useful and important. But if you're talking about calving grounds, you can also buy a whole bunch of bologna sandwiches and some bags of iced tea and send a whole bunch of students out on the land and get very, very good data on where those calving grounds are. So it's pretty exciting, and the best model was this dry upland heath, which is sort of the beach ridge, these granite gravel and sand beach ridges, with wet sedge bulrush fen around there, which is their forage, water, and then northern extent. They're clearly more closely associated with the north. So some pretty neat results there in terms of opportunities to say, well, this is, I think what we've shown quite nicely is that for this particular question, using shed antlers is a great opportunity. And what we had planned to do, I spent a lot of time talking about what we thought we wanted to do this past summer, but one of the things we want to do is start actually taking samples from those antlers and look at DNA and start to see relationships between those animals. Are these the same females going to essentially the same spots? Or are they relatives, or are daughters and granddaughters and great-granddaughters, are they coming back to these same sites? Or is it just sort of which I think is probably not the case. I think that these animals are moving around this large area and essentially calve wherever timing happens to hit them. I don't think they're that specific from just sort of what we've seen, but I think the DNA will actually start to shed some light on that. So that's pretty exciting and pretty kind of a novel way to look at it. And it's a great way to engage youth. You could take this red area also happens to be hot spots for polar bears in the summer, so you have to be careful and have all kinds of precautions. But you could take a group of any people out and a hike or on any kind of a training program and very quickly and effectively and cheaply collect a lot of antler locations. And walking as a group and someone yells shed, and that's a female shed antler, and then the person with the GPS runs up, takes a quick GPS location photo, and away you go. So it's kind of cool. But also, of course, reproduction is critical, and the notion of where the calving grounds are and where the caribou are is critically important. And so the other thing that we're doing is going to each of these calving sites where those calves were born and looking at the habitat on them as well, and finding that, as it turns out, looking at all, I didn't include all the plant species stuff, but I will tell you the take-home message, which is that caribou will calve almost anywhere as long as it's not too wet, and also they avoid any tall willows, which is interesting because we also study moose here in Saskatchewan between Saskatoon and Regina. We've been collaring them and looking at habitat use. And moose do the exact opposite. They sort of travel all over in these big open environments, and there's virtually no tree cover in that area, 0.04% tree cover. But right before they give birth, they make these big movements and find heavy, heavy cover to hide in. Caribou do the opposite. We have never seen a calving site near the tall willows, which are primarily around lakes and streams. But there are significant patches of willows that are more than 2 meters tall that could be hiding habitat. Caribou have nothing to do with that. They calve right out in the wide open tundra. And we have, with very, very few exceptions to the very south end, we've seen a few calving sites that are in very sparsely treed habitats, but the large majority are out on the tundra. And so we see females with calf at heel, and using information from those antlers and going to those sites, we can actually start to understand calving, and maybe that changes over time, right? There is some knowledge to suggest that caribou calving sites aren't always fixed, and they may respond to disturbance, which is a real concern. And so maybe that changes. And so this long-term monitoring, I think, will give us a lot of insights into what caribou are doing. And of course, one of the other things we see in summer is that they form these really large groups. And this particular group of caribou is actually right on the Hudson Bay coast, and about maybe half of them are out on the tidal flats. And when the bugs are really bad, they do a number of things. And one of the things they do is group up. And the other things they do is look for habitats that get them away from insects. And so we can see those. And so one of the questions we've been thinking a lot about is, what is it exactly that causes caribou to group up like this, and when, under what conditions, and then be able to ask the question, which we're sort of really ready to dig our teeth into right now, is that what happens in response to climate change as it gets hotter and potentially mosquitoes get worse? How are caribou going to respond? And certainly, anybody that's been out in the bush, especially up north, will know that it's not just a small nuisance, these mosquitoes and black flies and tabanids and other biting insects. It's really, it's a lot more than just simply that they're a small nuisance. This is serious drives animals to complete distraction. I've seen caribou lose their minds over caribou, and I've flown over lakes where all you see is noses and antlers sticking out, where they're actually in the water right up to literally up to their eyeballs, trying to stay away from bugs. So it can have a huge impact on them. Now, let's see. There we go. And so one of the really cool projects I want to talk a bit about now is work that Doug Clark, a colleague at University of Saskatchewan, started with Parks Canada, and I have very much jumped on his coattails for the ride on this. And it originally started, all of these cameras in the park were put on these camps, which I showed on the map. And these camps are, as you can see, have these great big posts embedded in the ground, and this is to keep polar bears away while you sleep at night. And so the cameras were originally initiated to look at polar bears coming up to camps. But what came out of this, and working with Doug and helping him with some of the analysis with Mike LaForge and others looking at these data, we also realized that we're actually getting more caribou photos than we are bear photos. And so it created a huge opportunity. And so working with a number of students, including Maya, as well as Chloe, two of my undergrad students. Maya's now in the vet school, and she spent this past summer going through many thousands, tens of thousands of photos, trying to sort out all the caribou and wolf photos. And we've been working with our isomer students. Our isomer high school group meets every Monday on Zoom, and we did all summer and through the fall, and we still do. If anybody's interested in high school, roughly high school aged youth, being involved in sort of research and then data analysis, feel free to shoot me an email and connect with me to be part of this. But one of the great things about having all this trail cam data was the ability to get all of these occurrences of caribou and wolves that were showing up at these camps, and which is remarkable because, like I say, I've spent well over a year of my life staying in these camps in Wapask. I've seen a wolf near a camp once in my entire life, but guess what? When people aren't around, which is the overwhelming majority of the time, these camps are empty. You get all sorts of occurrences of wildlife, and because they're running 24/7, and Parks Canada does all the downloads in spring or summer, it's just been a fantastic collaboration. So we get this amazing amount of data that we can use to interpret and ask a whole bunch of questions. And so we're only just scraping the surface with, Doug and his students are chugging forward on bears, the black bear, grizzly, and polar bear that comes by these camps. And I help them with that, but we've been able to establish a whole program based on all the caribou and wolf. So we get these amazing photos of caribou coming right past these cameras. And again, because they're going throughout the year, we can turn these pretty rapidly. And by rapidly, I mean somebody else doing a lot of the work. A lot of people spent a lot of hours, both isomer and Maya Kleiwer, going through these and pulling them all out. And then Chloe, over this past summer and fall, has been actually IDing and trying, not only pulling out the caribou, but how many, and sex and age, of course. These are nice mature males, that big brow tine and those nice big antlers. Clearly, some good sized males there. And so we can sex and age them. We can count the number of animals and collect lots of data. We can also age them. There's a nice calf of the year. That's a fairly recently born animal, actually. That's so that would be not that many weeks old, the calf there. So that's pretty cool. So you get lots of great images. Not only is it fun to look at, but it does create for some amazing data. And very rarely, and occasionally in any of these places you stay in the park, you might go a few days or weeks without seeing any caribou, and then especially in the big groups in summer, you see these huge herds come right past, and indeed, certainly well over 1,000 animals in some cases, just coming past. And when you go through these images you might see several hundred photos of just caribou walking past constantly. Really remarkable. And of course, our friends, the wolves that are coming up to these camps as well, are coming past the camps and getting some nice photos for reasons I don't totally understand. They like to lick the cameras. I think they can hear the cameras. That we've actually put them in a sound studio and picked up little bits of sound from them, and so we think they hear them, and we think there's probably some human smells from touching, but they love to check them out, and they like to lick them, but which works well for us. We get some very nice photos, and we could, you can look at color phase. You can we've sort of talked about and looked at sexing wolves, but it's not easy, as it turns out, and so we're sort of parked that idea for now, but at least we can get pack size, and we can certainly get the occurrence. And of course, from the cameras, what you get is temperature and time and date, and of course, because you know where the camera is, exact location. So we've got a lot of data that comes with every single photo, which is pretty exciting. And yeah, they definitely are curious about the cameras and check them out on a regular basis. So they're a lot of fun. And you're sitting there by yourself going through these images, and someone is like, "What are you laughing at? Why are you laughing so loud?" And I find it absolutely hysterical, some of the things that these animals pull off in the camera images. And there's probably one of the bigger group photos we have of wolves as well. So yeah, lots of great data from the pictures. And so just a few, I'm not going to go through too much of the data today, but I wanted to just show you some examples of some of the work the students have been going through. And one of the things that comes out of this is we can actually just count the number of occurrences that we have across the 10 years of the project. And so we're seeing from this one, we're actually seeing what appears to be a fairly notable trend here in terms of increasing occurrences. And so that really speaks to the value of the long-term nature of this work, that 1 or 2 years of this is interesting and exciting, but once you hit the 10-year mark plus, then you can start to talk, or at least think about longer term trends. And of course, after 25, 30 years of this, we're going to have something really, really exciting here to monitor some of the trends, and that these data sets are very complementary to other programs like collaring or aerial surveys and these sorts of things. And so in terms of, we talked a little bit already about groups, and this is the biggest group I've ever seen. I took this out of a helicopter in July many years ago. I think it was 2007, I believe it was. And some poor summer student spent quite a long time trying to count them, and I think she estimated it was just under 4,000 animals in this one photo. And so what we see are animals fairly dispersed in the spring, and like I say, those females will step aside on their own and have their calf, reasonably isolated from the rest of the group. But then post what we call the post-calving period, which is essentially the rest of the summer. This is the post-calving area or post-calving grounds that they're on. This is about maybe 20 kilometers south of that Nestor 1 camp, right near the coast. We just happened to fly right past it on our way. I actually thought it was a shadow at first from a cloud, and happened to be just right in the right place. And this past summer, I know Parks Canada staff there, Russell got some really great photos, and Matt, I think too, of some really large congregations. And so what drives this and how these things work is a really, I think, super interesting question. And as I say, the implications for climate change, because they're doing lots of good things to avoid insects already. So these big groups, theoretically at least, and you see these animals constantly moving towards the center. And so you push your way to the center, and the next thing you know, you're on the outside, and you push your way to the middle again. And these groups are moving across the landscape amazingly rapidly, actually, and feeding along the way, but also constantly trying to get the center. So we think it's insect avoidance, probably. It also floods the market for predators, right? So if a wolf shows up and you're by yourself, the odds of getting chased are quite high. But if you're in a group of 4,000 and a pack of wolves show up, the chances of you getting away are quite good. And so there are some other benefits as well, but we think it's really, our initial thought was that it's driven primarily by mosquitoes and black flies. And so working with Chloe, and this is just sort of hot off the presses for her undergraduate thesis project, she's been looking at, so because we get temperature with all of the sightings, we have thousands of these sightings and so we pulled out caribou group size from every photo and temperature as well. And so if you look at this relationship, what's really, really striking here is that, from anywhere from 0 to 20 degrees Celsius, the biggest group of animals we've ever seen in all of the data is 11 animals. But there's some magic magic switch that happens that at 21 degrees, all of a sudden, after 21 at 21 and above Celsius, you see group size explode. It just blows up, and you get much, much bigger group sizes. And as I say, anything under 12, the only thing we've ever seen is under 12, from all the way from 20 degrees to 0. And so temperature doesn't seem to affect group size until you hit that magic switch. And our thinking right now is that's, again, driven by the temperature which really activates those bugs, the biting flies. And there is some literature to back this up. And this past summer, Chloe was going to come up to Churchill with us and be out in the field, and we were going to collect more data on the insect activity with respect to temperature and relative humidity and other things. COVID kicked that in the butt, but hope is strong that we're going to get out this summer. And hopefully, we've been sort of thinking about ideas of how do you collect good long-term insect data. And we've been talking a little bit about, can you set up a CO2, which is the big attractant for insects to caribou is the CO2, have some kind of CO2 and a trail camera and actually record insects across the whole summer and see that peak, which we expect is going to happen at that 21 degrees Celsius mark. And again, what will be really exciting, and Chloe and I have been talking about next steps already, and this idea of saying, okay, well, we have a certain number of days right now that we know that are warmer than 20 degrees in Wapusket in any given summer, and look at that over long-term, from long-term records, but also University of Winnipeg has done some amazing modeling of predicted change. And so they have the spatially mapped out. And so one of the things we've talked about is saying, okay, well, in this particular area where we're studying these caribou, is it how many more days? So in 15 years from now, 25 years from now, how many more days of 21 plus degrees are we going to have? And of course, the prediction, we have dug into the data, but the long-term prediction, of course, is we're going to have more. And so what does that mean for insects and harassment on caribou and of course, long-term survival? Those are unknown. But given this, we suggest that we're going to see grouping more often and perhaps earlier and later in the summer as well. Virtually every picture I have of groups of caribou of large size, and indeed our trail camera data bear this out, is they're essentially in July or very, very early August, with virtually no exception. So there's this narrow window where it's warm enough to activate these mosquitoes for really serious. And so, yeah, lots more to dig into in terms of how individual species, so black flies versus of course, the famous nose bot that squirt their maggots up into the nose of caribou, black flies, and the big, what we call bulldogs, the ones about the size of your thumb. And so looking at different species of bug and really digging into this is going to be hopefully another 10 years or so of research at least. Lots of exciting questions. And there's just a long old picture of Ryan in July. You sort of get a sense of the kind of mosquitoes you get on a hot enough day. Once it gets warm enough, those bugs really do come out of the woodwork and can cause tremendous stress on these animals to the point where they're not feeding as much as they could or should be because of the harassment of bugs. And this probably doesn't even do it justice how really bad it can get. Some other work that I'll just touch on a little bit before I start to wrap up here is some of the other things that we're getting rolling on is looking at lichens from trees, or what we call arboreal lichens. Caribou rely on this quite a lot. We know from other areas they do. We don't know from our study area. And so working with the Manitoba Métis Federation and Derek and myself, we were hoping to get trail cameras out into the caribou wintering area, because the summer areas, that tundra, I showed you a number of pictures of that. And that's cool, but they actually go more into treat areas in the winter in the southwest corner of Wapusket, and even way out into the wildlife management area and beyond the rest, into this large wintering area. And we think that probably as the snow gets really deep, that in fact there, and we know from other studies that rely on these lichens hanging from branches of trees, and as the snow gets thicker, it actually creates access to these lichens. And so two of my students here, in 2019, in our last time we ran the field course, we actually did some clipping and quantifying biomass of lichen, taking photos of trees and using a pre-existing guide to classify trees and really start to get a handle on quantifying this. And we want to collect lots and lots more sites with our high school group, with our university class, and some directed helicopter trips, and ideally a winter trip as well, or spring trip, a snowmobile where you can get around a lot better and cheaper to get a look more at the arboreal lichen. We also have, this is our longest term data set by far, is we've been running transects around this whole park and area since the late 90s when I did my master's. And we were documenting vegetation cover, soil moisture, and that fancy metal rod there is a super high-tech gadget you can make for any local welder will build for you, and you can probe that down into the ground until you hit solid ice, which is permafrost. And the distance between the ground and where you hit ice is called the active layer, and the thickness of that active layer varies from about 22 centimeters to probably on the order of certainly more than 4 or 5. We've seen more than 5 meters where we ran out of extensions on our probe and couldn't hit permafrost. And so we document permafrost, and we ID every single plant in there and look at plant cover and soil moisture and all of those things. And like I said, we have thousands of sites that we've sampled all over the park as long-term. It started sort of through my master's, and we've had students from 15, 16 years old all the way through grad students and postdocs collecting these data over, since the late 90s. And so it's a pretty exciting data set. And you can see just off to the right there, there's a second transect. So our standard protocol is 2 paired 50-meter transects, and we've been doing the same way for a long, long time, supervised and, with training and all that good stuff. And so we've had many, many hundreds of students contribute to this database. And one of the things that we do is we call our Uber sites, where we actually have a bunch of groups go through and do the exact same flag in the exact same way and look at, be able to actually quite well quantify, human error or variation amongst individuals. And not surprisingly, if you train them right and supervise them well and all that good stuff, that you get really, really good usable data. So that's pretty exciting stuff, and that will continue. And again, the more time we have, years and years of accumulation, the more useful it will be. More recently, in 2019, we started doing clipping experiments as well in quantifying biomass. And so take those quadrats, clip all the green material, sort it by species. And Jackie Hoffman spent a lot of time, as well as our friend from Parks Canada down from Grasslands as well, came up with this in 2019. And he stayed up into the wee hours clipping plant green material, weighing and sorting by all species, and really quantifying that in areas where we know caribou use and in sites where we know caribou don't or minimally use. And so that kind of biomass research and linking it with satellite that also measures greenness through this normalized difference vegetation index, linking the satellite to what we have on ground, we're going to really, I think, be able to answer a lot of questions around phenology in that green up curve, and really start to look at this, what we call a trophic mismatch, which has been documented in a number of caribou herds, where traditionally caribou arrive on the calving grounds right around the peak of the green vegetation. And so they give birth, and then during that critical period where they're nursing young and regrowing, those females have access to the best quality and best quantity of vegetation. What's unfortunately happened as a function of climate change is that caribou keeps showing up at the same time, but green up is starting earlier. And so more and more caribou in a number of herds have been documented, including the herd just to the north, the Kamenieriak migratory herd, has been shown that they're showing up on the calving ground at the same time, but in fact that's now on the downside of that green up curve. And so they're not getting the optimal. And so the more that climate change impacts that, and caribou probably won't be able to adapt that quickly, unlikely, they're going to be dealing with lower quality. And indeed that translates in, some of the work out of Greenland has actually shown that translates into lower reproduction and real population level impacts. So that's something that we're excited to get moving forward on. And, and again, with all of this stuff, working with lots of collaborators and lots of support from the Churchill Northern Studies Center and Hudson Bay Helicopters and all of our partners from Parks Canada, and certainly been really, really great. It is, I will say, without question, it's been the best long-term collaboration of my entire career. Working with Parks Canada folks has been awesome in terms of just working together on different projects, and Parks is moving forward with a bunch of caribou initiatives as well, which is really, really exciting. And they've got another, I just saw invitation, they're having another workshop this winter, which is brilliant. So they're doing all kinds of good stuff as well. And one of the great examples was we got 34 hours of helicopter time from Polar Shelf this summer. We're all ready to do all sorts of teaching and outreach and get students and local people out on the land and grand notions of plans. And of course, COVID put that to rest, and we never got up to do anything. Parks Canada and Derek and myself worked together to plan out the aerial survey for Caribou that we've been just starting. And they conducted the entire survey, being, they live and work in Churchill, so they could do that safely. So that's a brilliant example of great collaborators where you can sort of give and take and share and work together. And really speaks to the value of those collaborations when things, uncertainties hit, especially over the long term where, this year was COVID, maybe 5 years from now, there's just no money. And money is always a challenge when you're flying groups of people out to the park. You're spending $10,000 to $15,000 just on the helicopter bill or more, getting groups out here to do the work. And so whether it's cost or COVID or other things, having those collaborations, I think, are absolutely invaluable. And so I just want to end with a quote from Dene elders who I've heard say this a number of times, that no one knows the ways of the wind or the caribou. I think it could equally be, I've only touched a little bit on the wolf stuff we're doing, mainly because it's early days. But we're really getting into those data now. And of course, one of the big next step is linking the wolf and the caribou data together. And ideally, going forward, again, talking about partnerships would be to, maybe expand into some additional wolf research as well. And the park is talking about maybe doing some more collaring, which is more on the invasive side. But if the communities are on board, I don't think I certainly support and use it. I mean, that's been a cornerstone of our research for years. So not to denigrate different kinds of research, but recognize that, if communities support it and it's something we need to do, then we go forward, but not just the old way of just sort of thinking that it used to be that the only way to study animals was to either kill them or collect their poop. In the early days, there was sort of not a lot of other things that you could do, or just go out and, one of my early mentors, Dr. Bill Pruitt, studied caribou, some of the earliest caribou research in North America. And, he would just go out and just watch caribou. And so that's great. But there are lots of other ways to get other data, and thinking about this whole notion of engaging people and training youth, training all sort of what we often refer to as HQP, highly qualified personnel, from anywhere from 15 years old to postdocs and PhD students and grad students and undergrads and all of that good stuff. And so trying to find ways to link that, but really thinking about this, this no one knows the ways of the wind of the caribou is true, because a lot of things we learn or think we know about caribou, they surprise us and take us in a whole new direction. And certainly before we started all this in the early days, we thought that caribou really stayed sort of this side of the park side of the tracks, and we're kind of concentrated in the park area. And we didn't realize how far caribou actually moved until we got further into this. And lots and lots of exciting new things coming. So that's really what I wanted to cover today. I think I'm reasonably on time. I do want to, I won't read through the whole list, but certainly NSERC has been a cornerstone funder of this program for quite a number of years. And Karma, none of this would happen without CNSC. And of course, as I've mentioned a number of times, Parks Canada is our primary core partner from the logistics and collaboration, and even putting in some money as well, and supporting, especially in the early days when I had nothing. they were absolutely cornerstone. When I didn't have what did they say, a pot to piss or a window to throw it out of, they were there. So much thanks to a whole bunch of groups, and of course the University of Saskatchewan that has supported me in all kinds of ways to this. As a guy who ended up in a Department of Animal and Poultry Science, I wasn't sure how all of this crazy research was going to go, but my colleagues have been wonderfully supportive. If not slightly confused, is exactly what I do, but just been awesome. And I work with a group called the Indigenous Land Management Institute as well. So thanks so much for the invite today. And I hopefully haven't gone too long, that we have maybe 10 minutes or so for questions. I would love to hear comments, questions, and certainly feel free to follow up with me if anybody wants to be part of this somehow, part of not necessarily through choice. I think it found me, but part of my job is finding ways to get students out into Wapusk and working with partners on that. But if you want to get out and do some of this, then you just got to call me and we will figure it out. So thanks so much for coming out, and just awesome to see a list of participants. Like I say, a bunch of people that I have no bloody clue who you are, but I'd love to talk with you, and a whole bunch of long-term friends and colleagues and collaborators have been working on this, and we're pretty cool to see a bunch of students that took this field course over from way back in the days of 2004 all the way to now. So thank you so much. Appreciate it, and wonderful to see you. And hi, Mom. I'd gladly take questions if we got, let me see, I'm going to turn on the chat here. Jess is here, but you may jump in. But I think if we're good to go, I'm going to take questions until people leave and don't want to talk to me anymore.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. If you have a question for Ryan, feel free to turn your microphone on and ask him directly, or you can type it in the chat and he will be able to see it and respond to you that way as well.
Well, I like Joe's comment. I also, flattery is also good. Enjoyed your presentation. Thank you. Petro says, do any wolves react negatively to camera traps? We have not seen that, and I didn't include it in the presentation. But one thing we have, which is really cool, is we actually have a trail camera on an angle bracket facing another trail camera in a couple of camps. And there's one where a wolf is nose in, staring almost very closely, touching the camera, and it's a series of 3 photos which our cameras are set to take. And the first one, the flash is not going off, and you see the wolf right nose up to the camera. The next one, the flash is full blast right in the animal's face, and it's actually overexposed with this bright light illuminating the face of the wolf. And then the next one, the flash is done and the animal's still looking. And there is no, certainly evidence that I've seen of animals reacting negatively. In the early days when we had just normal flash photography on our and the early cameras and the home-built stuff, lots of negative reaction, of course, at night. And you know full well, someone takes a picture at night in your face, you're going to really be impacted and startled by it. But no, this is, as far as we can tell, completely invisible to animals. We've never seen any negative reactions, and that collecting that burst and having some of those angle cameras has really given insights to confirm that, at least not, I mean, you can't always quantify impacts, but animals keep coming back, and we're certainly not seeing it in the camera images. So good question, thanks. From my dear mother, when those huge herds are calving, do they spread over a large area and over a long period of time? Yeah, and so these animals are in fairly small groups so they're in the wintering area as we speak, and then in the spring they will start to make their move in May, and they'll head towards that calving ground, and there will be different groups, so they're not all in one big group. There'll be often what Dr. Pruitt would call bands of caribou, 10, 12, 15, 20, maybe 50 animals. And those will be fairly sparsely collected, and they'll be spread across that whole area, that whole calving area, that big red area. So they do, and you saw the spread of points. The calving sites are spread out quite well. And then right before calving, the animal will step away from the group, step off the edge of that beach ridge, and often it's right on the edge of those big gravel sand ridges. They just step away, maybe it's 40, 50 meters away, and they fall behind the group that's moving and drop their calf. And these calves are extremely precocious. They're on their feet within an hour and highly mobile. So they're back together with the group. And then in that very shortly after that calving period, that's when it gets warmer and the group sizes go up and the bugs are bugging them. And so that post-calving period is when we see the big groups. Yeah, good one. Do you have any plans to put trail cams out in the park where other than camp fences? Yes. So that has Doug and others, and I didn't mention the folks at La Perouse Bay. They have been doing at Nestor 2 camp. They've been doing a lot of camera trapping for geese, and so they've been very kindly sharing theirs with us as well. And there have been a number of cameras put out. I believe the park is planning to put more out as well. And us working with parks and Manitoba Métis Federation, and Métis Federation is actually paying for most of the shot, is we're going to be putting out a whole bunch of cameras out in that Caribou wintering area as well to the southwest. So big plans for as soon as we get this damn COVID out of the way, we plan to put out a lot more cameras and do more things for sure. Yeah, Dr. Pruitt, yes, a famous guy, really had a huge impact on my life. I don't think I'd be studying caribou if I hadn't crossed paths with Pruitt and his very famous student who also worked at University of Manitoba, Rick Rewe, who unfortunately just passed away mere days ago. Those two had a tremendous impact on me, and Pruitt did a lot of the early stuff. And in fact, if you watch or read Never Cry Wolf, some of those stories that Farley Mowat stole from various people, some of those were Pruitt's actual experiences. when he was working in northern Saskatchewan, he ordered a radio so he could be in contact with his wife, who had a young baby in their little cabin up at Wollaston Lake. And the thing arrived, and it was actually bigger than the cabin they were living in. I think Farley stole that one right out of there. Since you've been completing non-invasive monitoring, have you completed any hair snag traps or fecals? No, we haven't done that. That's a good question, Brianne. As always, I have fallen into this trap of trying to do too much. Those would be excellent, and certainly getting into the for those of you students, don't do like me and not follow the genetics line, because genetics are this powerful tool which I have failed to become an expert on, or even marginally expert on. And so some of the genetic analysis we can do with hair and fecal samples is great, and that is something we should do, especially with these fences. You could do hair traps pretty easily for animals coming by in that. So lots and lots of potential for sure. Dylan says, is there a presentation? Yes, this is being recorded, so you can watch the whole thing. Absolutely. Jeff says, are you seeing wolverines? Not many. We've seen some, which is pretty cool. We aren't, for reasons I think they're fairly obvious, because these camps are being used by humans. They're not baited. And so I think if you wanted to get serious on the wolverine business, you would be putting out cameras and hair snag traps and sites far from where any people are, and putting some baits on there, and you'd see a lot more. But I will say that over my entire life spending out there, I've seen, I think, one in my entire life. But of course, the trail cameras see a lot more than that. So we have some. It'll be a fun student project to dig into that, actually, and look at those. Like, with all that diversity of data and all those animals, like I say, we've scratched the surface with a handful of species, but so much more to jump into. Is wolf predation a threat to caribou? Wolves are certainly the primary predator. We've seen polar bears chase caribou. We've seen caribou carcasses with bears feeding on them. Wolves are a predator. There's no evidence that they're a threat. And certainly across the circumpolar north, in so many of these populations, we've seen these devastating declines, if not collapse, of some caribou populations. But yet the caribou in Wapask, this Cape Churchill population, seems to be doing well and staying in that 2,000 to 5,000 range as long as I've been going up there. And so it seems that they're thriving and doing well. So no evidence of major population impacts. And of course, there is some good literature to show that wolf predation is important indeed to take out those sick and old animals. And in fact, you can contribute to healthy populations as long as those stay in a reasonable balance, that wolves are actually part of a healthy ecosystem. Is it recorded? Yes, it will be on the, oh yeah, that was not a question. That's just saying, yes, it's recorded. Absolutely. Vicky says, do you see any caribou that are collared on the cameras? No, I think we have only a handful. We've seen the collared animals out in our travels, but the collars mostly fell off earlier on, and so I think they were started about 2010. So we've only seen a few. I'd have to check our database on that and actually ask Amaya that question, but there are a few, I think, of collared animals, yeah. Well, great questions. That's it. I think I got through them all. Did I miss anything? Cool. Oop, hold on, just saw something come up here. Chris says, thank you. Oh, were they woodland caribou? Well, that's a good question, and there's been some genetic work. So Michelin Monceau and others have looked at samples from those, and it looks like these are some weird mix of caribou, and it makes sense, right? These caribou are sort of right in that area between woodland caribou to the south and migratory barren ground caribou to the north. And so these caribou, this Cape Churchill herd, is their migratory eastern caribou is what they're technically referred to. And given but it also opens up this big question: is how do you define a woodland from a barren ground? Is it genetics only? Because the genetics show that this herd is a mixed bag. It's some more barren ground, more woodland, and some mix of the two. So the genetics tell that one story. But then from the collar data, when we actually look at behavior, a lot of the majority of the caribou act like they are truly migratory from these winter areas to the south out into the tundra in the summer and back and forth, and they make these very characteristic movements that are classic migratory caribou. But then we have these quote-unquote sedentary animals that stay in the southern areas in the bush. And so do you define that based on behavior or genetics or some combination of the both? And I don't think that's really been sorted out yet. And in fact, we see both. And so are some of these, they certainly act like and look like woodland caribou. We canoed the Owl River right through the heart of the study area. And in the first day, we saw moose and great gray owl because it's much more boreal and lots of trees and some big spruce and all that good stuff. And we saw caribou, and this was June 8th, I think, which, of course, according to all the research and everything we think we know, they should have been at Cape Churchill with the rest of the herd, but in fact they weren't. And so yeah, there's a lot more work we need to do, and we want to visit. We've been to the calving grounds of the migratory animals, but we haven't looked at the calving grounds of these quote-unquote sedentary or woodland or whatever they are yet. And so that needs a lot more work. So the answer is we don't know. We do see a whole range of color phases of wolves, not as many black ones. We see the sort of the classic gray wolf style. We've seen a few white ones. There are some black wolves. I've seen them. I've also seen, there's a trapper in Churchill that I've gotten a few pelts from, and he has a number of black ones. So we see the whole color phase for sure, but black is less common from what I've seen in the trail cameras and personally, for sure. Yeah, Max's question wanted to ask about the Dene quote, no one knows the ways of the wind and the caribou. Yes, absolutely. That is don't tell me I wrote it wrong, did I? Or what was your question? Maybe clarify, Max. Hopefully I didn't get it wrong. Hi, Victoria. I had you as a guest lecture. I will listen to another presentation. Cool. Oh, great. Yeah, nice to see so many students and people that I've interacted with in the past and all that good stuff. In a perfect world, and normally probably the worst part of COVID is that WildEcol is, of course, typically everybody goes out for a beverage after, and that's where the good discussions and a lot of the great information sharing occurs, is having a snack and a drink together. And so I wish I could take you all out and buy you some beer. Unfortunately, we can't. So that would be the wonderful opportunity to chat some more. Max, I'll check on that. There's a reasonable chance I got that wrong. Yeah, so if people want to follow up with me, feel free to shoot me an email or we're on the Facebook and on Twitter and all that good stuff, so you can find me pretty easily. And more than happy to talk about collaborations, and if folks want to get out and see and do some of this crazy stuff, really excited to help you do that. Obviously there's caribou all over the circumpolar north, but this particular group and this particular space is my favorite place on earth. So it's got a real attraction for me. I've been able to see many different parts of the world, but I just get pulled back into this particular spot. So thank you so much, everybody. If people want to stick around, I mean, we're past 4:34 now, so people are probably already deking out, which is absolutely fair game and totally cool. But if people want to stick around and either type in questions or unmute yourself and ask a question, I'll stick around for a bit more and we can chat for sure. I'm not in any huge rush to get anywhere. So thanks so much again for the invite to WildEcol. And this, it's been a great program that's been running for Nicole and I. Nicole is one of the people that started this, and she was thinking it started in 2003 probably. Pardon me, 2013 I should say. And so it's been around for about 7 years now, and it's been really great. Awesome, thanks everybody. Good deal. Everybody's
yeah, it looks like folks are dropping off, but we can hang out here for as long as folks are here, but it looks like they're disappearing pretty quickly here.
Yeah, people have places to go, people to see. Absolutely. Good. Thanks, Max, for joining. Thanks, Petrus. Great to see you.
All right, for the last folks who are still remaining, I just put a note in there in the chat for our next WildEcol in 2 weeks on the 22nd. So yeah, keep an eye out for that information as it gets posted throughout the next week or so. And yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us for this really great talk. And thanks to Ryan for sharing a really interesting presentation.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks a lot. Thanks to everybody. Somebody said, do we monitor wolves as well? Yeah, we're working on that with the trail camera. And where are we here? Yeah, we're monitoring wolves. we would love to do endocrine analysis. I don't have anybody that I collaborate with on that yet, but that's one of many things that should be looked at for sure, is collecting samples to look at endocrine and some of these stress markers and things. Yeah, that would be wonderful. And that's one of the things I try and realize, is that we can't do it all, or I can't do it all despite my best efforts. And so we need more and more good collaborators for sure.
I'll sneak a question in here before we take off. But do you collaborate with any folks up there doing shorebird work? Because that tundra habitat is obviously good shorebird breeding habitat, I would imagine. Those mudflats. Do you have any overlap with monitoring those populations?
Yeah, we haven't, not so much collaboration, but certainly out of the study center, there are lots and lots of bird researchers doing really, really cool work. And that's one of my favorite parts of, well, there are many reasons why I like staying at the Churchill Noted Study Center. But the number one for me is the interaction. You sit down for dinner and there's people studying anything from rocks to bugs to shorebirds. And there's lots of good, really good research, shorebird research going on that I'm aware of. I didn't talk about the land cover vegetation map I've made and now updating, but that map has been used by all sorts of researchers. So in that sense, that's been the main collaboration, is providing good high resolution, high accuracy land cover vegetation mapping to anybody and everybody doing wildlife research. Francesca says, why the high number of caribou occurrences in year 6? Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, that's the challenge with a lot of this. It's one thing to observe various changes, and it's another thing to explain why. We don't know. Part of that, I mean, caribou do cycle. We know that they go up and down, and that's normal to see populations go up and down as long as they don't get too high and cause a lot of habitat damage, or get too low, and then we worry about them being able to recover. So that kind of variation I don't think is cause for too much concern. But having said that, it would be great to have more insight into that. So it could be related to, really hot summers. It could be related to really difficult winters. There's a whole bunch of factors that we could jump into. And as I say, once we get lots and lots of years of data, then you can start to do some modeling and look at the relationship between fire and snow and, extreme winter and extremely hot summer days and those sorts of things. So it's probably a combination of factors as well. And we haven't really dug into the parasitology of this herd at all yet either. Let's see, Petra said, fairly naive to Churchill, but was led to believe the wolves up there were Arctic wolves. Well, that's a good question. I mean, as far as I know on the taxonomy, Petros, that all of these are Canis lupus, and that, there was a whole big drive to, at one point, I think there were several dozen different species and subspecies of wolves out there. And I think for the most part, as far as I'm aware, I don't know that there's a big difference between what you would call an Arctic wolf or a gray wolf. The ones I've seen, I've been fortunate to travel across the Canadian North, all the way from the Western Arctic to Hudson Bay sort of thing. And so I've seen a lot of wolves. I'm not convinced there's any real taxonomic difference. There might be some, physical phenology differences, like some might be bigger than others depending on what they're feeding on and climate and all of that. But my sense, and I'm a very self-admitted a lumper, not a splitter, but I think they're all the same. That would be my a wolf expert may disagree, and I'd certainly be happy to be wrong on that. But that's certainly my sense from what I've read and seen myself. Cool. Thanks, Petros, for coming. Great. That was great. I see. I don't know, Jess, if you had a sense of how many people actually attended. I didn't get a count or anything, but
it looked like, I think at the peak, 85 was the number I wrote down. So.
Oh, cool. Oh, that's great. Well, that's good fun. I'm glad everybody came out. And if anybody has, let's see my.
Yeah, and just I guess we only have a few folks left, but we do have 1 or 2 open slots left for WildEcol. So if you or someone who might be a good candidate to give a talk on really anything under the umbrella of wildlife science, feel free to reach out to any of those WildEcol coordinators on that sheet. There's a number of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, have you had Paul Boyce doing the feral horse stuff? He's great. I definitely recommend him. The other one that maybe it's not till next year, we'll have to think about it, but we just started this study with trail cameras in and around the city of Saskatoon, this urban wildlife stuff. And so Katie Harris is doing her master's with me. And so I think probably towards the spring, she'll have some substantive data to start to look at and share. So I'll talk to her about, see if you have one that's sort of March, April, something like that. That'd be great.
Yep. Yeah, we have March or April 2nd, I believe. So, yeah, cool. That would sound good. That reminded me, are those the trail cameras you see along the Meewasin Trail up and down the river?
That's us, you betcha, yep.
Yeah, I've heard some folks, and I don't know the validity behind them, but rumors of mountain lions being, within the city limits up and down those trails. I don't know if that's just tall tales or if there's any science behind it, but I always imagine those cameras that I see would maybe be good to catch anything that's moving up and down the river corridor.
Yeah, that's part of we actually run transect all the way through the city from out on Nag Land all the way through the city east-west, and we also run another one north-south. And so we do end up with a bunch of cameras along the river, but also spread across all the entire urban-rural gradient. So it's going to be interesting. Oh, Tracy says that she has looked at the genetics of wolves, and she says they are not. Sorry, it wasn't. No, they are not. She says there are two subspecies in the series, Canis lupus hudsonicus and Canis lupus grisalbus. Oh, that's really cool. Tracy, if you're still on, if you could share the paper or any findings of that, I'd love to see that. There certainly hasn't been a lot of wolf work done in this general area. Thanks, Mercy, mentioning the trails. There is a network called UWIN, and all of the cities that have urban trail camera projects, or the majority of them, are all we meet pretty regularly. So I'm not sure about Washington. If you think of the name, maybe send it my way. But there are we do collaborate with the cities across North America. So there's Edmonton and all across the U.S. as well, and it's increasing. We've been talking about actually. Ryan Fisher and I were talking about the idea of putting them up in Regina as well. So hopefully that will expand and we'll see more of that. So yeah, super fun. Yeah, research has been plenty fun. So thank you, Jess. Appreciate that. It looks like we've sort of run out of questions, but thanks to those who have stuck around and been paying attention. This was good fun. As I was building this, I had to stop myself because I was like, is 320 slides too much? So I definitely sort of had to reel it in a bit because there's lots to talk about over many years. But this was good, focused discussion anyway.
Yeah, that was great. I think this might have been, I'm not positive, but our largest turnout so far. So that was really nice, seeing a lot of folks tuning in. But yeah, I guess if anyone has any last questions to sneak in for Ryan before we kind of wrap this up, I'm just going to probably terminate the meeting relatively soon if no one else kind of wants to pop a last minute question in.
Cool.
All right. So yeah, just once again, thanks to everyone for sticking around for these questions, and thanks to Ryan for a great presentation, and hopefully you can come back in the future and share some more interesting information about this project with WildEcol down the road. And
cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Take care,
everybody. Time for it's beer 30, I believe.
Yeah. Everyone have a nice weekend. Stay safe. And yeah, see you hopefully at the next WildEcol in 2 weeks. So yeah, tune in.